Europe does not have tech giants. Apple, Amazon, Google, PayPal, and all the other companies you use on a daily basis are all American. This is weird, because Europe has 450 million people. We have one of the largest combined GDPs in the world. Our engineers are the most sought after in Silicon Valley. By any reasonable measure, Europe should be capable of producing at least one giant. But we're not. And I know what you're thinking. That must be because of all the EU regulations, but that's not it. Far from it. EU regulation is not the issue. The real issue is actually stuff that EU regulations tried to fix. Well, what's that then? Is it at all possible for us to build our own tech giants? Let's find out. The first reason has to do with what the EU market actually is. The biggest lie we've been told about the EU market is that it would be one market. It's actually 27 individual markets, with the theoretical infrastructure to scale into each other. This is very different from the unified American market. Take a look at how Amazon was able to scale in the US. To scale as fast as they did, Amazon needed infrastructure. They needed one system of warehouses, delivery networks, and payment systems. Luckily for them, the entire country uses the same services for all of that. If they wanted to expand from Ohio to Georgia, for example, they could simply go to Georgia and copy-paste what worked in Ohio. The entire country of 330 million people uses the same currency. They all speak the same language. They all adhere to the same fundamental laws. It is, per definition, one market. In Europe, one of our biggest e-commerce giants is Zalando. This German giant quickly grew into one of Europe's most successful e-commerce companies. It's a true success story. Today, Zalando has customers all over Europe, but that was far from easy, especially if you compare it to Amazon's journey when scaling the US. Scaling Amazon from, let's say, Wyoming to Delaware, compared to scaling Zalando from Germany to Sweden, are two completely different ballgames. There's no comparison. When Zalando moved into France, they didn't just translate the website. They had to rebuild their returns process, because French consumer law is different from German. They adjusted their payment options, because French shoppers use different methods than Germans. They rebuilt their logistics partnerships, because the infrastructure doesn't connect cleanly across borders. That's a massive operation to undertake, and that was just for one country. They then did all of that again for Poland, and again for Spain, and again for Italy. This is because Europe is not, and has never been, one market. It's multiple smaller markets. What this means in practice is that every European tech company begins its journey in an uphill battle compared to its American counterparts. With an American company, all you have to do is to buckle up and press the gas pedal. The Yankees can spend all their money on product and growth. The European company, on the other hand, has to spend its time and money on local compliance, localization, and rebuilding the same thing 6 times for 6 slightly different markets. This causes a massive headache for anyone trying this. This is what some of that infamous EU regulation has sought to fix, but it's not that easy. Member states have made deliberate political choices to remain sovereign, and good for them. Among Europe's different populations, it's a deeply unpopular opinion to give up all of your country's sovereignty to help some other EU country's tech startup scale into your country. People don't like that. Countries want to keep control over their financial systems, their own companies, and more importantly, their own cultures. The EU's single market doesn't just become one market because you label it that. That's the original sin. In terms of building tech startups, this is the biggest headache you have to deal with, much more than any regulation, and it impacts everything, including the most important thing, the money. If you want to scale a company, and I mean really scale it, you need capital. You need a big pile of cash, because to really scale a company, you need to hire people. You need to expand. You need to outspend your competitors long enough to win the market. That kind of money doesn't happen on revenue alone. You need investors. This is what's called venture capital. Investors give you money to do what I just described. Now, everything we just talked about isn't just a little headache. It's more than just an inconvenience. From an investor's point of view, it also makes the whole thing look a lot riskier. Think about it from their side. If you back an American startup, you're betting on one product in one market. If the founder can show good sales numbers in Ohio, there's often no reason to believe they couldn't have good sales numbers in Texas, California, Washington, and New York. If you back a European startup, you're betting on whether that founder can rebuild their entire operation many times over in vastly different regulatory environments, languages, and cultures. That's a completely different thing to do. It's a much riskier bet. And for investors, risk is something to avoid. Historically in Europe, you can usually find capital early on, when you're still only operating in one country, and when what you're asking for is only a few million euros. When you roll up and ask for a much juicier paycheck, it's a lot harder. That's why European founders, when they reach that stage, usually have 2 options. They can sell to an American company that has the capital and the distribution to take what you'd built and scale it globally, or you relocate to the US yourself, raise money there, and build from San Francisco. The most popular option is to sell. Just look at Skype. If you're old enough to remember it, you'll recall how amazing it was in the late 2000s. It was one of the first internet calling services, like Zoom or Teams today, and it was originally an Estonian startup. By 2005, they had 50 million users, and were growing faster than anyone knew how to handle. They needed the capital to keep up, so they sold to eBay, then Microsoft. Or look at Shazam. This revolutionary app was built in London, and it could recognize any song on the planet, but they couldn't raise the money they needed in Europe. Apple bought them for $400 million. MySQL is another example on the list. It's a database software company from Sweden. They were sold to Sun, then ended up at Oracle. These companies weren't failures. By every metric that existed, these were European success stories. The founders did well, but the companies still left the continent. That's what happens to European startups. And it's actually a bigger problem than one might think. In your day-to-day life, you probably use a massive amount of American technology. WhatsApp or Messenger for chatting, Google Cloud for file storage, ChatGPT, or the superior Claude for AI. Your whole life is dependent on American tech. The same goes for European governments, because they also use these same services. European militaries and hospitals, for instance, rely entirely on American cloud services. Our entire digital infrastructure is based around it. For a very long time, this was the most natural thing in the world. It was viewed as perfectly fine because the US and Europe were as close as two continents can get. Why build your own when someone else already built it better? But unless you've been living under a stone, probably have noticed this isn't true anymore. Since the Trump administration took office in January 2025, Europe has seen threats of having Greenland be invaded, the US leaving NATO, or the constant back and forth with tariffs. Regardless of what you think of that, it's obvious that the US and Europe alliance is on shaky grounds. We're simply not the close-knit, unconditional allies we used to be. While I hope and believe this won't happen, a complete cutoff from the US, or even some form of military confrontation, cannot be completely ruled out anymore. And what do we do then? If Europe ends up in a serious conflict with the US, whether economic or military, and our entire digital infrastructure is based on American tech, to call it a serious situation would be the understatement of the century. European hospitals run on American cloud providers. European militaries use American communication platforms. European governments store some of their most sensitive data in American data centers. If the US ever decided to make that a problem, we'd be fucked. Because look, it's not like this can't happen. In 2022, Russia got cut off from SWIFT, the global financial messaging system that basically makes international payments work. If you were a Russian living in Germany, for instance, your card would overnight get rejected at any ATM. You don't have access to your money. So it's not like Washington won't do stuff like this. They could. Just imagine for a moment that the US and Europe end up in a serious conflict. And I mean a serious military conflict related to something like Greenland. As a European, you could potentially wake up one day and not be able to access your Gmail, not be able to access your iCloud, not be able to access your ChatGPT history, not being able to pay using any MasterCard or Visa card. They would, as Trump once eloquently put it, send us back to the Stone Age. That's why Europe must learn to build its own tech giants. We need our own cloud softwares. We need our own email services. We need our own data centers. We need our own payment services. The list goes on. If Europe wants to be a strong, independent civilization, this is a must. European leaders, as usual, are not doing enough. No surprise there. In 2019, EU launched Gaia X, which was the EU's sovereign cloud initiative. It was going to give Europe its own cloud infrastructure, independent of American providers. Well, 7 years later, I have never met a single soul using it. Classic Europe. This is how it always goes. So, why can't Europe build a tech giant? Well, as we've mentioned, Europe is not one market, it's 27. And that has made scaling a tech company here fundamentally harder than doing it anywhere else in the developed world. And now we're running our hospitals, our governments, and our militaries on the infrastructure of a country that could one day be viewed as an adversary. That's one spicy situation to be in. Big, strong, and independent European tech giants are what we need. It's what would sharpen our European edge. If you found this interesting, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Thank you for watching.